Well, good morning. It's Mark Lanier with your video thought for the day. Happy Friday if you happen to be watching this on the day it's coming out. If not, happy whatever day it is. Well, this week, I've been looking at the temptations of Jesus. These are recorded in Matthew 4 and Luke 4, and they're where Satan confronts Jesus in the wilderness with a set of three temptations. And I want to look at them in conclusion and look at the verse that's tagged on to the end of them out of Matthew today. And so let me say this. It's interesting to read and to study and to think about these temptations. You'll recall they included turning stones into bread. They included being shown the kingdoms of the world and being offered those if Jesus would simply bow down to Satan. And they also involved the temptation of throwing Jesus jumping off the pinnacle of the temple and trusting that God's angels would bear him up. And so with those three temptations, which Jesus answered, each one with scripture, we have an interesting history of understanding. Now, the earliest church, and by this, I mean the writing of the church fathers, they're called, the 100s, 200s, 300s AD writers. They had a great deal of difficulty with these temptations. They really struggled with them because they struggled in that they were the early church fathers were so wrapped up understanding the divinity of Christ. They did not understand how God, Jesus, could ever be tempted. And so the mannishness of Jesus was something that was really hard for them to grasp. They saw him just so much the divine one. Now it's interesting because if you read interpretations of this in the last several hundred years, instead of the first several hundred years, it's almost the exact opposite problem. Now a lot of interpreters have trouble understanding the divinity of Jesus. And so they challenged it and even attribute it to mythology that this ever happened. They don't like the idea that there's one who was able to fast for that period of time, that there's one who was able to be so divinely ministered to by angels, or the idea of the personification of evil by putting it into the form of the devil. And so where the early church had trouble understanding the mannishness and the idea of God being tempted at all, the later viewers of this have trouble understanding the divinity of it, and that there is something other than the physical nuts and bolts of what we have. Well, I think the truth of the matter is actually the way it was written. I think the truth of the matter is that Jesus is shown to confront those very temptations like Adam did. John will call Jesus, as Paul will, the second Adam, a new man. And Jesus confronted the temptations of Satan, much like Adam did, but when Jesus confronted him, he did so victoriously. And he did so because he did so by the power of God. That's the only way anybody overcomes temptation. But God does win over Satan. Good can conquer evil when God is behind the good. And so I think evil is real. I think Jesus was really human, but I also believe Jesus was really divine. And Matthew teaches all of that in just a few verses that illustrate these important truths. So it sums up in Matthew with, I think it's verse 11, where Matthew says that the devil left him, and behold, he do in Matthew. That means, bam, look, pay attention. All of a sudden, the angels were ministering to Jesus. They were seeing to Jesus. Now, this is a fantastically marvelous way to end this story, because it teaches me something and it should teach you something. Here it is. Temptation after temptation after temptation. Satan says, hey, you manipulate your godness and you turn these stones into bread to feed your hunger. Or you manipulate your godness. You throw yourself down from the temple and trust that the angels are going to take care of you because God says they will. Each time Jesus says, no, 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 no. I'm going to follow God, not you. I'm not trying to prove God. I'm not trying to make God my butler that does what I tell him to. He's not my bellhop to bring my luggage when I demand it. I'm going to do what God tells me to. And then here's the interesting part of the end. God does send his angels to take care of Jesus. God does provide for Jesus food. God does tend to Jesus' needs and ultimately gives Jesus the kingdoms of the world. But God does it in his timing, in his way. Jesus never forces the issue. What does that mean for me today? I want God's will, but I want it in his time, in his way. It's not my job to force it. It's my job to be obedient and let God's timing work for God's plans. It's your video thought for the day.